So a warm welcome and good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Tamara Russell and I'm here with the Mindfulness Centre of Excellence presenting the second in our series of Let's Talk About webinars. I'm really delighted to have this evening Joel Levey here from Wisdom at Work. He's one half of a dynamic duo who have been spreading the word of mindfulness and contemplative technologies and a whole variety of practices literally around the world for about 50 years. So we didn't go into too much the details of exactly how long, but it's a long period of service. And I'm really delighted that he's here to talk about impact and influence and really how we can bring mindfulness to places where people are making big and important decisions that affect everybody and really affect the planet. So yeah, people are joining us and welcome to all of you from all around the world. Thank you so much for coming online. It's great to have you here. We're going to be dialoguing with Joel. We're going to be having a chat and there will be time at the end to ask questions. If you think that you're going to forget what your question is or there's something really burning, you can use the chat box. I'll periodically be sort of checking in with that. And really encouraging people to let's practice presence and mindfulness while we're using this technology. It can get a little bit fraught with things binging and pinging and words coming up. So really trying our best to kind of maintain that focus and presence. So I'm just going to find anybody that's got their camera on. I'm really going to ask you to just remove your camera because we are videoing it today. So it's possible that you've popped up with your camera on. So don't worry, it's all good. So Joel, I haven't had the honor of meeting you in person yet, but we've chatted a few times online. And I think I'll just let you give a brief introduction to yourself, really, and then we'll get going.
Fantastic. Well, it's amazing to live in a digital age like this where we can feel like we have such a deep and intimate connection and know each other having never physically been together. But a deep bow to you, Tamara, for your vision and your generosity in hosting this digital chat, going global here. And it's a joy to be here. I see quite a few friends that have showed up, which is just heartwarming that we're all thirsty to keep learning about these endeavors and what's going on in the world and how are different people using this work. Looking at some of the people that are listed in the window above here, I see people I've known doing this work for 30, 40 years and colleagues and friends on the journey. And I think one of the absolutely most precious resources that we have available are our friendships, are the ways that we can nourish and inspire each other in this work, both in clarifying how we can go deeper within our own personal work, how we can sort of filter the resources and the many teachers and opportunities that are available in the world around us to inspire and inform ourselves and sort through and find the real treasures that are available. And also to share best practices. I think, one of the gifts of these times is that things are so complex that none of us is really smart or brilliant enough to do it alone. So this is a time to, I think, try and fathom the depths of collective wisdom and intelligence and learn how to listen deeply together, learn how to reflect deeply together, learn how to pray deeply together, and bring forth the good and the new and the skillful and the effective and the transformative means for creating a world in which beings can realize their highest potentials.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're on your way back. You've just got back from Dubai, haven't you? So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about this was the World Leadership Summit. So I don't think this was your first visit there, was it? You've been.
This was the second. It's actually the World Government Summit, but okay. I think you could say the World Leadership Summit with heads of UNESCO and the IMF and the World Bank and people telling the story of the development of WhatsApp. There were over 4,000 participants from 150 countries. It's kind of like a Middle East Davos in many ways. It's actually bigger than Davos, and Davos is trying to partner with them actually to figure out how to get more people there.
Okay.
But unlike many other gatherings, it was really graciously hosted by Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. And basically, they flew in all of the participants from around the world to be together for 4 days to have a profoundly deep dialogue and exploration around all things that are challenges and opportunities facing our world today. This session really had a lot on cryptocurrency and artificial intelligence and space colonization and alternative energy. And it there was one session that was opened by a very beloved actor from the United States who opened his session saying, "I have come from a very, very backward nation where people don't believe in science, and you can't, in government documents, speak to evidence-based science, and and just speaking to the insanity of these times, but also to be in an environment where science and good research and research around human flourishing and wellness and happiness were an integral part of this on an international scale." It was phenomenal. And we were fortunate we were invited because two of their excellencies in the Prime Minister's office had found us, essentially their HR manager had found us online. And we began a dialogue, and she ended up flying the excellencies out to Seattle to meet with us for 3 days to begin to have a conversation around mindfulness and resilience and mind fitness and how to create flourishing cultures and how to create Dubai as a beacon of hope and sanity and possibility in the Middle East at this time. That was their motivation in coming. And after they went back to Dubai, Her Excellency Ahoud became the Minister of Happiness for Dubai, looking at science around human flourishing and how could they bring that into the society. And His Excellency Mohammed became the Minister of the Future, exploring, where do we need to go and how do we prepare for the future. And they also have a Ministry of Youth.
Yeah, great.
With a 24-year-old young woman bringing together youth, especially from across the Arab countries, to inspire each other about, ways that they can flourish and develop. And they have a Minister of Tolerance, whereas the UK has a Minister of Loneliness.
Yes, well, I just saw that.
Oh.
That's Tracy Crouch, I think, or Couch. She was She, I think, was one of the participants in the mindfulness-based cognitive therapy that they ran in the Houses of Parliament here in the UK. And she was also somebody that, if I remember correctly, she was somebody that was able to speak more about her personal struggles with depression more openly as a result of doing the training. So yes, she doesn't surprise me maybe that she was part of that. But you had some involvement with the UK AllParty Parliamentary group as well, didn't you? Are you able to share a bit about that experience and advisory capacity?
About 6 years ago, George Poor invited us to the UK, and coincident with that, we hooked up with Madeline Bunting, I think, from The Guardian, who is part of the All-Parliamentary Roundtable on Mindfulness at British Parliament. And we were invited in, pardon my cough left over from the trip. We were invited in to do a briefing for the group on how to really set standards, high quality standards for bringing mindfulness into organizational and corporate programs. And how to consider, what qualified instructors really are in this day and age where mindfulness has become so diluted and extracted and bastardized in many ways and commodified that the meaning of the word in some circles has become nearly meaningless.
Yes.
So, it was actually a very profound session, just looking at our experience back in the days when we first started introducing mindfulness and mind fitness and all practices, interior and transformative, into higher education, into medicine, into organizations. We literally knew of absolutely nobody else working in the field.
Mm-hmm.
There were 2 yoga instructors in Seattle in those days. I mean, it was like the wild west of just, wide open horizons. And years later, somebody said, "Oh, have you heard of John Kabat-Zinn?" And he's doing some similar work to you. And we actually had started similar initiatives, us on the West Coast and Johnny on the East Coast, the same year. It was years until there was enough, connective tissue, enough of a conversation going on a national, let alone international scale, that we even knew of each other. And when we met, it was just like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Like Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons and, just Homo novos finding each other. So yeah, fantastic.
And to me that points to this sense of the evolution of mindfulness in society. I mean, do you have any comments or reflections on that evolution process and where it might go?
The work really has evolved. The pure strain of mindfulness really came out of the Asian cultures, Southeast Asia, Thailand, Burma, Sri Lanka. Pioneers of dear colleagues who had been exploring and kind of mining the treasures of those traditions and bringing them back to the West. And that was in the late 60s, early 70s that many of us started sitting our first Vipassana courses and bringing, like the full, whole meal, whole plant, non-extracted version of the teachings into Western culture. Over the years, this has really differentiated, and I'll show a little slide here of some of the variants of this. Can you see the image on the screen there?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So we've got the Vedana Vipassana tradition from U Ba Khin that came down through Goenka and John Coleman in the UK, and Robert Hubbard, Ruth Dennison. We've got the Forest Monastery stream that, like at Gaia House in the UK, coming down from Ajahn Chah, Jack Cornfield, Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, Ajahn Amaro. And then we've got this Vietnamese stream of mindfulness teachings that came in from Thich Nhat Hanh, which are a bit different. The root's the same, the branch is a bit different. And then in the Tibetan Dzogchen tradition, there's a stream of really profound teachings related to mindfulness in a very deep and essential way. And then in the lower part of the diagram here, you can see some of the many variants that have been adapted, kind of extracting some of the vital elements of mindfulness practice and bringing those into Western culture, into therapy, into business. There's dozens more that you could put into this diagram. But along the way, it's sort of like a pharmaceutical company going into the Amazon and finding a very potent medicinal plant or potion and extracting an alkaloid out of that, or one active ingredient, and trademarking it and commodifying it and marketing it. And it's not to say it doesn't deliver value, but it doesn't necessarily have all of the other endogenous molecular and fungal and kind of the prayers that would go into it in the traditional cultures. So I think we need to realize that we've paid really a great price for the extracting, and it's different streams of benefit that I think the modern variants in many ways have drawn many more people with a thirst to what's the real deal, what are the different flavors and traditions. And I think we've been really fortunate and somewhat unusual to some degree over the years, because we have, in a sense, been Dharma mongrels, kind of exploring and studying deeply with many teachers and many traditions, and having their encouragement and blessings to weave and interweave and to honor the unique styles and traditions, but also, to have many tools in our, many apps on our device, so to speak, that each have their field of application.
Yes, and Echo is saying, I love that term, Dharma mongrels.
Yeah.
So yeah, using this language of Buddhism, I guess, to refer to the teachings. And I suppose, this is something that's prevalent in the UK, where we've been very interested in this idea of secular mindfulness. But even in the secular mindfulness, what appears to be coming out in the research, particularly in the clinical groups, is that it's changes in self-compassion that are underpinning the changes in mindfulness. So, we came in with this quite strong sort of cognitive, attention-based sort of way of working and defining mindfulness, but actually, somehow we ended up talking about love and, taking care of one another and taking care of oneself and the interrelatedness of those things, and then we sort of pop back out again into, Dharma type language, spiritual language, or, maybe even religious language. And I suppose I was interested a bit in terms of your experience in Dubai, about thoughts about the intersect or the overlap or any issues around the Islamic faith and mindfulness. Was there any kind of comment on that or discussion about that?
When Her Excellency Ahud and Mohammed came to Seattle, that was a huge piece of the conversation. How do we take this science and these deep, profound, transformative traditions? How do we carry these into an Islamic culture that has a certain set of filters, and you don't want to trigger the immune system by bringing in something that can't be assimilated or integrated into the culture. We actually were fortunate to just very spontaneously, when they were with us, reach out to a friend who's a imam and a Sufi sheikh, and lives in the Seattle area. And he came and had lunch with us, and we had this wonderful conversation about the precedent for mindfulness within the Islamic tradition. Yes. And just some of the verses in the Quran that, essentially, how it's framed in Islam is very much kind of, it's like practicing the presence of God would be in the Christian tradition, is a kind of frame on mindfulness.
Yes, yes.
Or in the Jewish tradition, there's this notion of the Shekhinah, this indwelling presence of God, that when we're in mindfulness, when we're in that open, clear, selfless, boundless, embracing quality of being, that in a sense, we have merged our identity and our frame of reverence, a reference, with this profound kind of dimensional capacity that we have. And in Islam, I think, in a similar way, that when we abide in the presence of Allah, when we abide in the presence of, when we merge our consciousness with a sacred view, when we stay aligned in the true to that which has meaning and purpose and congruence with reality, which is selfless and dedicated to the good of all, where we have aligned with Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, with great compassion, great love, great mercy. That when we're in that quality of mindful wholeness or holiness, it's totally congruent with the tradition. I'll share an image that I have here from some presentations that we've been doing of mindfulness. If mindfulness is the whole sphere, excuse me, to appreciate when we kind of secularize it, we snip off some of the tasty bits of mindfulness. You know, we use maybe a universal perspective. We lose a sense of honoring of selflessness or of loving kindness or compassion, or a sense that whatever goodness or merit or benefit we find in this, it's just not a narcissistic endeavor that we're cultivating for our own good, but there's a sense of generosity to emanate and express the goodness and the inspiration of what we find through our practice for the greater good or for the good of all. Those kinds of elements, sometimes when it really is cognified and commodified, and you don't want to put people off by being too universal about it, you know, we lose these very profound and potent elements of it. And somehow over the years, Michelle and our work have been pretty skillful at being able to bring these pieces forward, to find ways to linguistify and contextualize these kind of universal, if you will, maybe more spiritual elements in a way that people go, well, of course, yes, that, and they can have the potency of it. But I think it's taken a certain kind of depth of our own practice and perspective to do that. Yeah. And also a profound amount of reflective meditation of how do we carry this medicine into a certain context and make it relevant? How can we bring this technology and make it relevant for software engineers or physicians or what have you?
I think even using the word technology to describe it is already an interesting starting point when I hear you use that language. Yeah, sorry.
Inner technology, I think that's very helpful. And inner science. One really simple example with this, I think is beautiful and very profound. I remember the president of Silicon Valley Bank came to a program we did back in maybe the late 80s, early 90s. And we began the session by just having people consider what is their intention for coming to the session, like you did today. Thank you. To clarify that intention so that they could really be present on purpose, with clear intention. But then we also invited people into a creative meditation, if you will, of just sensing ourselves at the center of our universe, and that if we were to leave this session, or even today, I invite all of us into this contemplation. If we were to leave this encounter or this conversation with an inspiration or a practice or a perspective that allowed us to show up more wholeheartedly, or to bring a deeper wisdom or a greater skillfulness into the field of our influence. And if we were to play that forward through all of the networks of influence and connection we have, how many people's lives might we touch for the better over the next 5 years or 10 years or 20 years? Just play that forward, a little bit more wisdom or love or listening or what have you, and to envision the ripples of that, of how many people's lives we might touch. And we did something similar to that with in the session with the head of the Silicon Valley Bank. And she started going back and starting every meeting that they did at the bank with just a few moments of reflection at the beginning, of just envisioning all of the stakeholders who would be touched by the decisions made in those meetings. Mm-hmm. And the policies brought forth and the business plans that would be created. And to, in a sense, have the 15 or 20 people in the room envision the thousands or the millions or the billions of people who would be touched by the decisions that they put in place. Mm-hmm. And to let the presence of that in the field of their view of reality recontextualize their work, to give it a deeper grounding and a deeper meaning and a deeper kind of responsibility. At one point, we were facilitating a merger, an acquisition actually. Intel was taking over the most like advanced company in Denmark, fiber optic company called Giga that made fiber optic couplings for telecom networks. And we were invited in to help facilitate the negotiations for what the acquisition would look like. There's about 60 people in the room, and we started that session in a similar way, saying, envision how many people will be touched by the decisions we make here in the next 3 days. And then we asked for estimates, just how many people, just so we can put that in perspective. One of the owners of Giga is an engineer, raised his hand. He said, 2.5, 3 billion people probably that rely on our systems. And the engineer sitting next to him, his colleague, said, yeah, and I wonder if we're creating the kind of world that we want our children to grow up in.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And right there, you just slide into such deep waters. The work becomes contextualized in a much more universal, much more meaningful, much more responsible, much more, if you will, sacred manner. And that's so accessible to everybody if the context can be appropriate. And that has a lot to do with the linguistics that we rely upon.
Yes, and the language of mind, of course, is can be a little bit fraught, and this is partly what it seems that we're learning often, even just in a basic 8-week mindfulness course, is some language to describe the mental processes and the experiences that we have. But I think at this level of boardroom or senior leaders, people making the decisions about mergers and acquisitions, how to provide the right language that lets them open that door. And then, of course, they have the opportunity to discover.
And what we've found is the most skillful way to discover that language is to ask questions and to see what words and what frames of reference people bring forward, and then just use that. So
yes, yeah.
Part of it is just, over the years, learning what works through our own experience, but each culture, each group of people, just to put out the questions and then just see how they make sense of it, and then incorporate that, splice those genes into our next wave of evolution of articulation.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit then about how you did that in your development of the work for the Jedi program? Because this was really attracted my mind. Whoa, what is this?
Yeah. That was a phenomenal endeavor. I was working at a medical center back in the early 80s and got a call one day from a former graduate student of mine in a consciousness studies program. He said, hey, Wiz, because he used to call me Wizard. Hey, Wiz, how'd you like to design the ultimate warrior training program for the U.S. Army Special Forces? And I said, Bud, what have you been smoking? She said, where did that come from? And he said, no, I just came back from a meeting with the Delta Force back in D.C. And I met some people, and they just released a study that said more than twice as many men and women committed suicide when they came back from war than died in combat. So you can imagine like the Vietnam Wall memorial times 3.
Yeah.
Twice as many people having taken their own lives in various ways.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, the leaders at the Pentagon really had a lot of shame and a lot of grief around that. They wanted to develop a program to develop the capacity of people that were in horrendous circumstances to make wiser decisions and to transform their reactiveness in those situations. And they didn't know what to do, so they were asking for a proposal. So we sat down for an afternoon, banged out a proposal kind of on the back of a napkin.
That's how the best projects start, yeah.
Sent it into the folks at the Pentagon, and they came back saying, this is the most exquisite orchestration of human technology we've ever seen.
Brilliant. Oh, you're going to show something.
And, I can show a few slides here.
Please.
If I can get here. So I love this quote from the UNESCO Charter. It says, since wars begin in the minds of men, it's in the minds of men that we must erect the ramparts of peace.
Very nice.
And, though we had, we probably had a 50-page document of deliverables for the program. In many ways, what we were really there to do was to teach the men how to stop the war, recognize and befriend their inner enemies, and to stop the war inside. And so the program was called, let me see if I can just get to this. Go to the screen. On paper, the program was called the Ultimate Warrior Program. In actuality, the men called it Jedi Warrior. And we were on base for 6 months full time. We had a lab with $200,000 worth of neurofeedback and biofeedback equipment. We took them on a month-long silent encampment / mindfulness Vipassana course. The national treasure of Burma, Tengpulu Sayadaw, and his student Rina Sarkar. It's a really fantastic mindfulness Vipassana teacher. They helped us design this month-long retreat. It was a phenomenally transformative program. But this notion of teaching the men to recognize and befriend their inner enemies and stop the war inside was such a core piece of the charter for this. And I remember we interviewed the colonel who oversaw the program when he retired. And Colonel Getty had taken many of the men that we had trained into Europe running special operations after our program was over. And we said, Ken, what are you most proud of from your many years of service to your nation? And he said, I'm most proud of the number of covert humanitarian operations that we were able to run that helped thousands of people and nobody ever heard about it.
Yeah.
And there was this really profound sense of altruism. We brought Brother David Stendelrost, a Benedictine monk, in for the program at one point. And his opening words to the soldiers was, well, when I was in the Nazi army, because he had been impressed as a young, I think, Austrian man, he could either be killed or he could go be impressed into the army, which was kind of excruciating. And when he came out, he became a Benedictine monk and a phenomenal force for good in the world. But watching Brother David work with these men, who I must admit I had strong judgments about them and the archetype of them, and I was continually humbled by those judgments, by the goodness that they brought forth. But Brother David really ennobled them, I'd say, within the first 5 or 10 minutes, in a way where he said, look, regardless of who you think you are and what you're doing or what other people think about you, please take to heart the nobility of the dedication that you have to be willing to sacrifice your life to protect and help others. And, he took them straight there. And I'd say within probably 5 or 10 minutes, about a third of the guys in the room had tears in their eyes. It was just phenomenal to see this little guy, about 5'5", with this magnificent, courageous, sacred presence just show up and just kind of like
direct.
I think
no mercy, straight to the heart.
I think of we were doing a corporate program once for a big software company, Intuit Software, and there was a guy that had been a preacher in a fundamentalist church. Things had really fallen apart, and he became so despondent that he joined the Hells Angels. And he was with the Hells Angels gang at one point and kind of whining about how his life was falling apart and he didn't know what to do. And the leader of the Hells Angels group, who was this little tough guy named Chubba Bubba, took Preacher by the neck, and kind of grabbed him like this and started pounding on his chest and saying, the answer is right in here. And I think, Brother David and our program, imagine coming in to go to work with Joel and Michelle and friends for 6 months, just mindfulness, neurofeedback, deep reflection. What is your purpose? Can you embrace the grief and the cognitive dissonance of decisions you've made in the past and how those scars have touched you? And can you find compassion for that and dedicate yourself to living in a profoundly dedicated way as a force for good? 6 months of that, these guys came out of that program so reworked. It was phenomenal.
Were there any that, I mean, in my imagination, there might be some that would leave the army after that. I mean, did any of that happen? Or?
Yeah, it was interesting. They had to sign up for an extra year of duty to have the privilege of doing the program. It was a huge investment in them.
Yeah.
But, we had people like in the month-long meditation retreat, we gave a talk on interdependence one night. The end of the, how all things and all beings are connected. End of that, one of the guys raised his hand and he said, but Joel, if what you're saying is true, how could we ever kill anybody? Whoa. And so we spent the next 2 or 3 hours saying, let's explore that. What does that mean? Under what circumstances? It's like deep questions. So I think, many of the guys really got that they could stay in the system and be a force for transformation and good and inspiration. Mm-hmm. They were really dedicated to that. Others couldn't wait to get out and explore maybe a more transformative path in their own unique ways. It was, we had 25 guys, so there were 25 different programs going on.
Yeah.
But one thing that did was that gave us enough kind of street cred to then, after that program, go out and be able to carry, in a sense, the scars and the medals of that time with us. And it has been a credibility piece that has just opened the doors to, well, if they were able to do this work successfully with the special forces, maybe we can invite them in here.
Yes, and I think I just came back from running a retreat on the weekend, and it was wonderful and beautiful, but there was 41 women and 1 man there. And, he was the husband of somebody that was attending. And, when you look at the research and the kind of gender balance, even in the research, some of that's more about women kind of coming forward with mental health problems and the stigma and the shame for men. I mean, what's your sense or experience or message for those out there who are maybe more interested in saying, how can we help, men if they're not routinely coming to our classes, or if we're meeting them in the more boardroom senior leadership space? What's your kind of reflections or tips for people?
Sometimes we get asked questions like that, or how do you deal with resistance, and honestly, I've seen Michelle be asked that question. We look at each other and go, we don't encounter much resistance. And I think, part of it is context. One really kind of fun, but let's just cut through to the heart of this kind of practice and make it interesting. We can do that here. Just for everybody listening, in one hand, reach out and imagine you could hold all of the moments of your life that you fully lived. All the moments, if somebody was talking to you, you were listening. If you were eating food, you were tasting it. If you were having thoughts, you were mindful of those thoughts. If your children were talking to you, you were giving them your attention. All those moments when your eyes were open and you were seeing, and if you were tasting, you were tasting. The moments that you fully lived, and hold those in one hand. And then the other hand, imagine you can hold all the moments of your life that have passed by mindlessly, unnoticed, unseen, unfelt, unlived, completely irretrievable, never to be seen again. The moments, those expensive bottles of wine that you didn't taste a bit of because you were distracted, and those fine dining moments with big tabs that you never tasted the food, and those precious moments with your children that you just were gone. You know, the demons of mindlessness had carried you away from your life. And then hold those hands in relative proportion, what is there? And then we'll ask people, what percentage of your life have you really lived? Have you really been mindful? Have you really had the courage and the care and the dedication and the discipline to show up for? And having asked that probably of close to 10,000 people, on average, we'll hear 3 to maybe 15% that people have really showed up. Some of the research, if you look at research on mindlessness, they say 47% at the time. That, I think, is phenomenally,
low.
Yeah. But, in the feeling humbled by this, in the sense of, oh my God. Yeah, and we'll say, so if your child gets to be 10 years old and you were only there for 2 years of it, let's be generous, say 20%, is that good enough? If you live to be 100 years old and you only showed up for 20 years of that, is that good enough? And it's just kind of like whack, get with the program. Can you feel the potential that's available to you if you really hold the intention to pay attention and to really wake up in the morning, and before you touch your devices and you get involved in external operating systems, to really activate and log on to your own primary operating system, to catch that first moment of the day that you're awake, to give thanks for the gift and the opportunity of another day on the great cosmic mat with the potential of awakening and being a force for good. So to be awake that you're awake, to be grateful, and then to really listen for your guidance. How do you want to live this day? What's important for me to remember and stay true to? And to listen for that guidance, to see how that intention comes to us, and then to really dedicate ourselves to living true to that throughout the day, and to not just for ourselves, but for the benefit of all. Not just so that we can be more successful, but so that we can be a force for good. And to set the intention for that. And then throughout the day to monitor and manage, to see when the variances introduce themselves and we start to wander off, and to come back and refocus in that intention. We go off again, and to come back to that. And, to live on purpose rather than just tumble into the day, distracted by our devices, not clear on why we're alive or the qualities of being we want to embody. Those kinds of little exercises and themes and challenges for people, it's just, they're charmingly accessible and compelling.
Yeah, sort of like some hard-hitting, reflective questions that generate that kind of triggering of what I would, the salience network is kind of a little bit shocked, and when the salience network is triggered, boom, then we pop up and go, oh, hang on a minute, what am I doing? Why am I doing
salience, beautiful. And I think, then in the workplace, if we can be successful at creating teams, organizations, community groups that really are interacting and reinforcing each other with this work, To me, one of the absolutely greatest pieces of artwork and creative endeavor is to create a thriving, healthy, mindful organization. And we've seen times when we've come into organizations that were toxic and broken and distrustful and just imploded and siloed. And we work with them for a while, and you can have dozens or hundreds or thousands of people that have taken to heart the kinds of things we're talking about. And when they're in the room together, they really show up. Not, and they're monitoring what's going on the outside and on the inside. And they bring that forward and they interact with each other with a profound sense of kindfulness. You know, a profound sense of mutual respect, a profound sense of honoring the internal processes within them and between them, and can tap into the field of their collective wisdom and intelligence together. And to be in those kinds of organizations is profound, you know, and it's available to everybody if we can find the skillful means to do that.
Well, and I think there's something about what you're describing, you know, it requires, yes, attention, intention, care, and, you know, often time. And I suppose one of the challenges in the modern working world and for senior leaders as well is really creating space and time to do this work. And, you know, we might break that down into kind of formal versus informal practices, kind of periods where you're maybe working intensively with an organization and then sort of figuring out how things can carry on. But is there any reflections on that might be helpful? You know, how has that been managed, or who's doing that well? You know,
yeah.
Practice issue, you know, how often, how deep, with whom, for how long, all those questions that we get.
Great questions. And, you know, for us, we've kind of taken a different approach to bringing mindfulness and mind fitness training, because, you know, mindfulness is one, you know, like one color in the spectrum. There's so many other profound practices that we bring in, like Pilar in the chat here is talking about magical practice, which is a acronym for a whole bundle of practices that we weave together. But our approach has been a bit unique and countercultural in that we very seldom go into an organization and do like an 8-week mindfulness class.
Okay.
What we do is we come in and we do culture development or leadership development. And it's oftentimes, you know, CEO to janitor level, you know, just this is how we work together, and, you know, what's important to us as a team, and let's do a strategic planning project, or let's do a team building endeavor, or let's do a new product development innovation series of sessions in a mindful way. You know, where the practices are just integrated into, this is what it looks like when you bring all of your human resources present to do the work together. And it's just kind of like a no-brainer. How could you ever think you're going to work effectively with distracted, confused, disgruntled, non-aligned on purpose and intention kinds of people? And let's just do strategic planning or innovation or team building and incorporate and weave these practices in. When we're talking together, it's mindful dialogue and reflection. When we're listening for guidance, there's a real sense of, you know, deep somatic presence and connection and openness to clear, open, sky-like awareness, to be mindful of the nuances of the little waveforms of thoughts and inspirations and brilliant ideas that may arise. And how do we bring those forward? And let's pause for a moment. Whoa, what just happened? How did that land within us? What does that mean? Just listen into that, feel that. What did you notice? Let's talk about it. You know, so great oscillation of moments of personal reflection, shared reflection, interaction, you know, getting the stuff on the walls or on the screen, you know. So it's very dynamic, very engaged, very unscripted in many ways. You know, our work is so jazzed. So we have workbooks and protocols and all that, but, you know, when you're in the mess of it, it's musical.
And I know you've got some things that you've been developing that you wanted to share a little bit with the audience this evening, you know, around, you know, what is available for people that might want to connect to you with this more longer duration programs, maybe experience some of the things that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And just, maybe we can have a little bit about this, and then we'll go to some questions and some comments from the audience. The expeditions.
Yeah, let me just put that in the chat window here. There's actually 3 things we'd like to share. So if people look at your chat window, through conversations with many colleagues in the UK, what's emerging is a call to offer a couple of year-long programs with us. There's some people on the call here who did a mini version of a learning expedition with us in the Catalan region of Spain, which was fantastic and brought together just an incredible learning community there. And then we did a European learning expedition last year, and now we're doing a North American one. It's an opportunity, I think, that's especially relevant, I think, for people that either want to really deepen in their own practice in a very broad spectrum way, or that just want to develop more professional skills and understanding and be part of a very intimate learning community to explore together over the course of 5 sessions over about a year, maybe 15 months, depending on how we do it. So what's emerging are 2 learning expeditions. One is just the UK learning expedition, which is open to anybody, coaches, CEOs, school teachers, anybody who's interested. And then recognizing also that there is, I think in the UK and maybe Europe, a little bit more of a stratification in terms of class and leadership and trust. We're exploring the idea of maybe offering an executive learning expedition that would be more for people that are heads of organizations that just want to, interact with other senior leaders, be it in nonprofits or charities or in business. And so there's a couple of links there. And then if you go to our webpage, we're also taking a group of people back to Bhutan. In September. And we went to Bhutan last March, just a year ago, actually. And that was a fantastic journey to the last country on the planet where the ethos and the values of the country are around creative altruism and dedication to awakening to our highest potential for the benefit of all beings. And we were so fortunate to go there. We had a great guide who will have again this year. And he'd take us into the temples and the monasteries, and he would introduce us to the people there, the monks there, as practitioners, not just as tourists. And we'd sit in the temples for hours, and all the thangkas and the paintings and the iconography. Since we've studied in those traditions for close to 50 years, we gave teachings and meditated in these just amazing places. And the monks would come over afterwards and thank us and say, "Oh, since you know and care about this, come, we'll show you the relic room or the treasures in the back." And just all the doors were open.
Amazing.
So we're going back to Bhutan in September of 2018. And if anybody's inclined to join us on that journey, if you go to our homepage, wisdomatwork.com, you'll see some pictures and some links. You can just click on those and get the information.
And I think certainly just sort of going back to the executives and kind of senior leaders, I mean, my sense in the UK is that there are people, they're really wanting to do something different, but this courage piece, when the system feels it's so ingrained, this is how we do it, this kind of sense of what can I do, and can I really be different, and can I really risk? There was a guy, he's a CEO of a kind of, one of these new beauty brands that's kind of getting everybody all excited, and he's just sort of done this departure. He no longer wants to be called the CEO. He's one of the workers. He's trying to kind of create a flatter structure in the organization. He wants all the social media to actually be him responding to things, not just paying people on social media to kind of promote people to buy things that they don't really need, and really just kind of, come out with a lot of initiatives. And there's been a mixed reaction, actually. Some people are like, oh my God, that's career suicide. What is he doing? Shareholders are freaking out, blah, blah, blah. Others people saying, no, he's just being real, and he's saying things that people are like, yeah, why is all this plastic in your shop? Get rid of it all. Like, what are you doing with that? Where does it come from? Who made it? How does it get here? Like, tell us these things that we want to know about this product. And, if you like the product, you go and buy it. You don't need convincing to buy it. This anti-marketing almost, which for me is an exciting moment. Yeah.
I think, just a few memes to lace in here before we go to questions. I think that's a great piece. I think, what's really required now is a profound interfusion of caring and courage. And I love, like we use the word VUCA a lot, and we've seen that kind of come in. It came originally from the Army War College describing the modern battlefield as an environment that's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And, we live in an age where business as usual is simply foolish. It's like Einstein saying, we're not going to find solutions to the great complex problems we've created at the same level of thinking and consciousness that created those problems.
Yeah.
And I think, and add to that, the notion that we're at the time of the great unraveling, where we have departed so far from what is sensible and sustainable and meaningful with our government systems and our financial systems and our healthcare systems and our exploitation of the planet, that all the systems are starting to unravel and fall apart. We're realizing they're unsustainable.
Yeah.
Gross national product is insane. It's like, so it's a time of the great unraveling, but it's also the time of the great turning, where we come back to wisdom again, where we start to look back for deeper, truer ways of living that are more congruent, that are more sustainable, that are more eco-sensible. And in this, there's a great honoring for science, and there's a great modern science, and there's a great honoring of ancient science. The technologies which are now being profoundly verified. There's anybody who says, show me the data at this point, it's like, how much data do you want? It's like, it's not like this stuff hasn't been really severely validated now. So in this, there's one, maybe last slide I'd like to share.
Yeah, just while you're finding that, I will point people to the chat box. Joel's got an article coming up in Positive and Mindful Leadership about leading in this VUCA times. So I think that's due to come out sometime in March. Myself and also our webinar guest from to come next month, Julia Adams, also writing an article in that, which is called Why Mindfulness Doesn't Always Work, pointing to the importance of intentions, a word we've used a lot in tonight's session. So yes, Joel, over back to you, that your slide is now visible.
Yeah, and Juliet's a friend and has worked with us as well. So, it's just what an amazing bunch of people are working in this space. And really looking over, who's showing up for this call, may we continue this conversation for decades to come, and look back and celebrate our successes. I think one last thought here, maybe before we go into questions.
Yes.
The other is just this notion of, can you imagine groups of people working together, embracing the huge challenges and opportunities of these times, learning how to quiet their minds, hold deep questions or prayers or needs that are present in the field of our endeavor, and to listen in a very deep and receptive way for the guidance, the inspiration, realizing that each of us is a multidimensional being embedded within the fabric of reality, like a raisin within the great cosmic pudding, you know, that we are connected to everyone and everything. And here in Hawaii, you know, we're surrounded by astronomers and telescopes and cosmologists, and they remind us that we can only measure 96% of what exists in the universe. And of the 4% that we can measure, 3.96% of that is dust blowing between galaxies. And the other 0.04% is like physical bodies and planets and cars and objects. So if we could just fathom that each of us, you know, what we can measure is maybe 99.96% missing, you know, that we're embedded within a matrix of great mystery, but through our minds and through the field of our consciousness, we can discern the nature of things and how to respond with intuitive wisdom. And if we can train individuals and groups of people to quiet their mind, to hold deep questions and deep prayers and innovative challenges, and bring forth guidance with that deep, sincere kind of collective wisdom and intelligence, I really do think that we can find ways to flourish in this world together. And in many ways, I think that the future of humanity depends on us learning how to do this together. Václav Havel said, you know, without a revolution in this, Václav Havel, the president of the Czech Republic, when he was speaking to the US Congress many years ago, said, without a revolution in the sphere of human consciousness, nothing will change for the better. And the catastrophes that we face will be inevitable. So I think, you know, for all of us on this call, great appreciation for our revolutionary spirit in being able to evolve ourselves and the communities that we have influence of, to tap into a deeper wisdom that we can flourish together with.
Well, I mean, on that positive and optimistic note, we'll pull this recording to a close, and then we'll go into some questions, aware that we have reached time as well. But thank you so much. You know, stay online, those of you that want to ask some questions, and just, you know, my deep gratitude to you for sharing some of your experiences. I mean, we could have had a million webinars probably, but, you know, maybe this is the start of some conversations, worldwide conversations. You would like to add something to end before we stop?
Just briefly, a moment of dedication. You know, I just really like to do that at the end of any session, and we do this with the corporate settings and all, but just basically, you know, whatever inspiration or benefit that each of us has gained through showing up for this time, to gather that into the depths of our being, like waves of light and energy and inspiration, and to really dedicate those energies like a light that will be that will carry with us as in our continuum of consciousness forevermore, to inspire us and empower us and infuse us with inspiration, and to let the energy and the light of that flow out through us from our heart into the hearts of all those in the field of our influence, and all of those who are part of the great connectome of unification that we're a part of, as just a wave of encouragement and activation of the highest potentials for the good of all. That we really realize we're not doing this work alone, and that we really are doing this work for the good and the benefit of all beings.
Beautiful. Thank you. Just let me